This is Keith Emerson, progressive rock keyboardist with bands such as The Nice and later with ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. As you can probably tell, he got a kick out of playing live. At first glance, you may consider his playing style here to be a little, well, unconventional. But let me assure you, he was actually a bit of a genius. In July 1970, ELP recorded their first album named simply as Emerson, Lake and Palmer. This contained the hit single called Lucky Man. Just before this recording, Emerson turned the moog on for the very first time. He wasn't ready to record a solo yet, but it was recorded when he did a practice run. And with no other recording tracks left, the rest of the band asked him to keep it. Otherwise, the take would be lost forever. It may not sound that spectacular today, but back in 1970, that solo sounded revolutionary. And deep down in truth, Emerson was never really happy with that solo, but I think it sounds just perfect. Keith Emerson wasn't just a great keyboard player, he was a true master of the keyboard as well as being a stellar songwriter and showman. He quickly established himself as one of the most formidable musicians of the prog rock movement. He played the hammered organ like a lead guitarist and was an important pioneer in the implementation of the moog synthesizer. Together with ELP, he helped set the compass for the direction successful prog rock should take and set the creative and technical standard for other prog rock keyboardists to aspire to. But I'm not sure if anyone else got there. Hello and welcome to The Yak. My name is Tom and today I'm going to speak about the great keyboardist Keith Emerson. In part one, I'm going to speak about Emerson's early life, his influences, and his appearance in several bands in the 1960s, culminating in his role with The Nice. And I think you're going to find it interesting. Emerson was born in West Yorkshire, Northern England in 1944, and his family settled in Sussex soon after the war. Emerson was an only child. He was shy but studious at school, and he preferred to stay in the background in the school environment. Emerson said that he had a disciplined childhood and that his parents didn't drink or smoke. His father played the piano, accordion, piano, and guitar, and purchased an upright piano when Emerson was about 8 years of age. After 10 months of Emerson dabbling on the instrument, his father arranged for him to have some basic piano lessons where he learnt how to read music. Although he did find learning scales and arpeggios a little boring, after his fun improvisational work. And despite these basic piano lessons, Emerson always considered himself to be self-taught. Emerson had a deep interest in classical music at this point, and after a couple of years he took part in some local piano competitions and remembered getting second or third place in a Bach recital in his early teens. He didn't really like rock and roll, but developed a liking for boogie woogie and for other pianists such as Jerry Lee Lewis and Floyd Kramer. By the time he was 14 in 1958, he started to take an interest in jazz, particularly jazz works performed by Andre Previn. His friends at the time encouraged him to listen to jazz greats like Hampton Hawes and Oscar Peterson, rather than just Previn, to broaden his scope. He would also rearrange well-known classical melodies into a jazz style on the piano, making school friends laugh with his jazz-inspired adaptations by Bach and Tchaikovsky, for example, thereby gaining the respect and admiration of his classmates. When he was 15, Emerson joined a local dance band playing big band music of greats such as Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman. He then formed a trio with Godfrey Shepherd on double bass and David Keane on drums in the early 1960s, and they began to play at small events such as parties and wedding receptions, playing jazz standards of the day. The trio was known as the Emerson Trio, with Emerson playing piano. Just before Christmas in 1963, when he was 19, Emerson recorded 7 songs using an old-fashioned Philips tape recorder. They were jazz standards, plus a 3-minute song called 56 Blues, composed by Emerson himself. The song being named after the street number of the rented house where Emerson lived. It's not prog rock, but a fast-paced blues track. At the time, Emerson could only afford to have 4 acetates cut of the recording, with an acetate being a budget version of the vinyl record. 1 copy went to each member of the band and 1 was spare, cut to try and get gigs. And we are listening to Emerson's 56 Blues from one of those 4 acetates. At the age of 21, Emerson moved from Sussex to London, where the live music scene was flourishing, and joined Gary Farr and the T-Bones, which included left-hand bass player Lee Jackson, who played a characteristic-looking Vox teardrop bass. Emerson joined this band in 1966 partly because their type of music allowed him to improvise, and it was here that Emerson's strong musical influences began to shine through, these ranging from Brubeck and Fats Waller to Bach, Aaron Copland, Oscar Peterson and Shostakovich. He was also becoming increasingly adept on the Hammond organ. Here's a recording of Emerson playing with them in France, and already he sounds like the star of the show. The T-Bones also played gigs all over Britain, but within about a year, the band started to lose popularity, and Emerson moved on and successfully auditioned for the VIPs, another blues band. Gaining popularity as a keyboard player, 3 months after joining the VIPs in 1967, Emerson was approached to form a backing band for an American soul singer, and that band became The Nice, an early progressive rock band which would blend elements such as jazz, classical and blues. This time Emerson assembled the band, The first member Emerson recruited was bassist Lee Jackson on bass and vocals from his previous band Gary Farr and the T-Bones. Then David or Davio List on guitar and Brian Davison on drums. The Nice became Emerson's first commercially successful outfit, and the band spent the end of 1967 touring alongside the likes of Jimi Hendrix and Pink Floyd. With The Nice, Emerson began composing works which were in a more original style. One of these songs recorded was Azrael, Angel of Death, with choruses in 5/8 time. And back in those days, rock bands didn't play in 5/8, so that was pretty unusual. Around this time, Emerson visited the Marquee Club in London, where an organist named Don Shin was playing. Emerson later recalled, "I happened to be in the Marquee when he was playing, and I said, 'Who is this guy?' He'd play an arrangement of the Grieg Concerto, the Brandenburg and all. So my ears perked up, playing it really well, and he got a fantastic sound from the Hammond 100. But halfway through he sort of shook the Hammond and the back fell off." Shin would also deliberately rock the organ to create a deafening thunderclap, caused by the reverb box being shaken to sound an attention-grabbing effect. And you can also hear part of Grieg's Piano Concerto in A minor being used here. Occasionally, following the rough treatment, one of the valves would work loose and all power would be lost. So Shin would jam a screwdriver between two organ keys to depress them, and the organ would sound again once the right valve was pushed back in place. And meanwhile, the drummer would perform an impromptu drum solo. Emerson was impressed by Shin's antics and thought, "Hang on a minute, that guy's got something." And I realised that from watching Don, it was possible to sustain notes on the Hammond by sticking things in the keyboard, and then I'd like to compile an act from what he did. Emerson believed that the organ was not an attractive-looking instrument, likening the L100 to a piece of furniture. "What I wanted to do," Emerson said, "was change people's image of that and make the organ sound more attractive. And it didn't have much visual appeal either, as a player usually sat at the instrument. I guess seeing Don Shin made me realise that I'd like to compile an act from what he did." And not long after, the shy Emerson did develop an act of his own, becoming the flamboyant and extroverted member of the Nice. Here's an example of Emerson playing with the Nice standing at the back of the organ, and so essentially, well, playing it backwards. Emerson began to create his own organ tossing routines. He would swivel the organ on one corner to create feedback, pick up and then drop the organ to make the spring reverb deliver explosion-like sounds, drop it down on himself, make it howl, and leap over his organ. Wrestling with the organ added a visual pressure and tension to the performance. Other contributions were his pained facial expressions, and sometimes Emerson would close his eyes, scrunch his face, grit his teeth and look upwards, looking like he was being overwhelmed by sheer agony and emotion, and as if he was living the battle. And he wasn't going down without a proper fight either. Emerson only used the Hammond L100 for this type of performance. When he added a heavier and better sounding Hammond C3 in 1968, he placed the two organs facing each other so he could stand in between the two keyboards and play both with his body unobstructed and stand in full view facing the audience. Emerson liked the great jazz player Dave Brubeck and the jazz standard he wrote called Blue Rondo a la Turque. This is Brubeck playing it here. Now that sounds very nice and proper, but I think it needs the Emerson treatment. As the Nice expanded their equipment used for live shows, a couple of roadies were recruited. One of them was this guy. Well, he might be a bit hard to identify from this photo, so I'll make it a little easier for you. Yes, it was Lemmy from Motorhead. And Lemmy, in fact, provided Emerson with the daggers used to wedge down keys on his Hammond organ. And in case you're interested, here is a rare example of Emerson delivering vocals with the Nice. But of course he didn't take his singing career too seriously.
So I wonder why when the pie in the sky gets green at the edge, jumps a senile hedge and asks questions. So I asked my ma and she said, ask your pa, and he said, ask your ma.
As we saw with Rondo, the Nice performed some fairly radical rearrangements of classical music themes, and in June of 1968 released their version of Leonard Bernstein's America, which also included fragments of Dvorak's New World Symphony. This was to become their most successful single. The original version had lyrics written by Stephen Sondheim and was a celebration of all things great about America. The instrumental version performed by Emerson with the Nice, however, was just the opposite, being a protest song about US involvement in the Vietnam War. Emerson was also aware of a technique used by American avant-garde composer Henry Cowell, referred to as string piano, in which the pianist reached inside the instrument and plucked, swept or manipulated the strings directly. And here's some sheet music written by Cowell, and I have to be honest, I wouldn't know how to play that. Emerson used some of these techniques in Hang On to a Dream, for example, with the Nice in 1968. And here Emerson appears to use what looks like a microphone to change the string length and alter the pitch. As you may recall, this same technique was employed at the beginning of ELP's Take a Pebble, which I will talk about in part 2 of the series. By mid-1968, the group had become concerned about the reliability of guitarist Davey List, and he was soon fired from the band. The Nice briefly considered looking for a replacement, with Steve Howe trying out at an audition. Howe got on well with the rest of the band, but a week later contacted Emerson saying that he had second thoughts and he decided not to join, choosing another band instead. Following Olist's departure, Emerson's control over the band's direction and song selection became greater, resulting in the development of more complex music, again with some classical borrowings. The absence of a guitar in the band allowed Emerson to redefine the role of keyboard instruments and helped set the Nice apart from many of its contemporaries. And it was here that Emerson decided that he most favoured the trio lineup of bass, drums and keyboards. With Emerson the star of the show, the Nice showcased a fusion of styles and did in many ways pioneer the sound of progressive rock. And the sound of the band strongly influenced the prog rock movement in the 1970s and redefined the role of keyboard instruments in rock. He certainly had a bright future ahead of him, and what is clear from what we've seen today is that Emerson loved to play and perform in front of a crowd. He liked to create drama and tension. The Nice certainly facilitated the emergence of the Emerson that we know and love, and he achieved his first taste of international fame with the band. But by late 1969, Emerson was getting restless, wanting to become part of a bigger act than the Nice could deliver. As he later recalled, "I felt there was nothing left for us to achieve. What I wanted to do was put together a new band, one that could take what the Nice had done to another level." In part 2 of this series, I'll be speaking about Keith Emerson with ELP, the outfit which propelled him and the other members of the band, Greg Lake and Carl Palmer, to an unprecedented level of international stardom. So I thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and ring the bell. And I love watching the 25-year-old Emerson play this song Country Pie, originally written by Bob Dylan. He looks like he's having so much fun.